Hey everybody, it's been a while since I did a live stream. In fact, the last time I did one was in August when that F-35B uh, had the mishap and was missing for 28 hours. Some of you have asked for an update on that situation. I just talked to the 2nd Marine Air Wing down at Cherry Point that has cognizance over the F-35 squadron at Beaufort. Had a very pleasant conversation with Major Salinas there, and she said that there's nothing to report beyond what we've already talked about. The mishap investigation is ongoing. So, as we remember from the Vinson ramp strike, F-35 ramp strike, some months ago, and in the case of that mishap investigation, it took a year or more for that to come out. So we'll just stand by. I'm on the list of organizations that will get heads up. And so, as I said, nothing more to report on that mishap. Lots of other things going on. V-22 mishap yesterday in Okinawa. P-8 ran off the runway at Kaneohe. Lots going on with Israel-Hamas ceasefire, hostage, prisoner exchanges, and we'll be on every one of those situations as we go along here. So if you're not a subscriber, become one. And also you have to sort of say you want notifications when you become a subscriber, so you get heads ups about things like this live stream. So same ground rules as always. I'll do kind of a scene setter, and then we'll have a conversation based on what's in the chat. So thanks everybody for showing up here on a Thursday afternoon. Hope everybody's well. Hope everybody had a great Thanksgiving. Getting ready for the Army-Navy game. I'm headed up there next week. As some of you may know, my Naval Academy class does the chain gang, which is the sticks and the down boxes and the yard to gain marker on the sidelines. And we've done this for about 20 years. I've been doing it for 8 seasons. So at the Army-Navy game, Army and Navy switch each year who's the home team. So when Navy is the home team, we, meaning the class of 82 guys who are on the chain gang, do the game. So I did it 2 years ago when it was at MetLife Stadium. That was a great game. Navy won. And we're headed up to Foxborough. This is the first time the Army-Navy game has been played in New England. I've never been to the Patriots Stadium. I know it's just been renovated. I'm excited to check that out. It's a long way up to Boston, and it's a long way from Boston to Foxborough. But we're psyched for this one. So that's coming up for me. Headed up Friday. Games a week from Saturday. It's going to be on CBS as it always is. And, regardless of records, the Army-Navy game is always a tough contest, or usually a tough contest. So we're looking forward to that this year. All right. So let's get going with our topic at hand here. Let me start with USNI News' Fleet Tracker. And if you're not subscribed to the USNI News newsletter, I highly recommend it. My good friend Sam Legrone is the editor there, and they are on the case in ways that no other news organization is. This is the reportage, the daily news wing of the Naval Institute. Again, as some of you may know, I worked there for 5 years, been associated with the Naval Institute for many years. They are the publisher of the Punks trilogy. So that's the job I was in when the YouTube channel took off, and I wound up being a full-time YouTuber. I'm still very close to those folks. I moderate panels. I do all kinds of stuff with them. But in any case, the Naval Institute News puts out what they call the Fleet Tracker on a weekly basis. So let's review the bidding here as we have in some of our current events episodes in recent days. So in the Med, which is 6th Fleet Area of Responsibility, AOR, we have the Ford off of Crete, and we have 1/3 of the Bataan Amphibious Ready Group, the USS Mesa Verde, as well as a intel ship. It used to be the Sixth Fleet flagship. I don't think it is the Sixth Fleet flagship anymore. Maybe it is. You guys keep me honest in the chat there. But the Mount Whitney is in the Med, along with UK and French and other coalition NATO warships, as a direct result of the Hamas attack on Israel of October 7th. And we've documented how Ford was sortied from the Adriatic, where they were participating in the NATO effort related to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and they sortied to the East Med to just have presence. And we'll talk about the nature of presence as we go along here. And you can see here that Dwight D. Eisenhower is in the Persian Gulf proper. We'll talk about how that ship got there. Bataan ARG is in the Red Sea. Again, ARG is Amphibious Ready Group. And that part of the ARG is the USS Bataan and the USS Carter Hall. Again, refer you to earlier episodes where we go in great detail about the composition of an amphibious ready group, including the Marine Expeditionary Unit aboard all of these amphibs in various fashions. So that's the 26th Marine Expeditionary Unit group. And then the other unit to pay attention to here, and it's very relevant to this conversation, is PAT 4 Southwest Asia. So that's Patrol 4 Southwest Asia. See, these are actually Coast Guard, U.S. Coast Guard cutters who are patrolling the waters there. And the Coast Guard sometimes doesn't get the love. Those guys are on the pointy end. If you've ever dealt with anybody who's in the Coast Guard, you realize that they are operating in ways that no other branch of service. Technically, it's Homeland Security, but that is an amazing group of very capable ships that are in the North Arabian Sea right now. So we talked about how in this previous episode that Ike got underway as scheduled, and we weren't sure which option they would take. So we talked about three options, and let me back this up here. So the first was go to the Adriatic and take over the presence mission there for Ukraine. Second was dual carrier ops with Ford and East Med. And the third was the one they did, which was go through the Suez, Red Sea, and now they're on station actually in the Gulf. So it took Ike a few days to start the transland. We're not sure what that was all about. Generally, after you get underway, and in this case, Eisenhower is home ported in Norfolk. The Air Wing CAG 3 is the F-18s. The Super Hornets are located out of Oceana. The Growlers are stationed out of Whidbey Island up in the Pacific Northwest, kind of near Seattle. And the E-2s are at NAS Norfolk, right there, along with the helicopters are out of NAS Norfolk. So you get underway, the airplanes fly aboard, do what we call fleet CQ, a couple of days of getting day and night qualled. And then once everybody's good to go, chain them to the deck, put them in the hangar bay, and start to haul ass across the Atlantic. Takes sometimes, depending on how fast you go, obviously, 5 days, 6 days. And in this case, they hung off the coast for an extended period, and not sure why, but they got to the Med, did a couple of days of dual carrier ops with Ford, again, documented in previous episodes, then went through the Suez, Red Sea, North Arabian Sea, and now they are actually in the Gulf. So Eisenhower, very capable aircraft carrier, very old aircraft carrier, the second oldest Nimitz-class aircraft carrier. I cruised on Eisenhower 91, 92 timeframe. That was my third deployment, my second squadron, VF-143, Puking Dogs, now VFA-143, flying the Super Hornet. Strike group is obviously with them. This strike group includes a Ticonderoga-class cruiser, the USS Philippine Sea, and a couple of Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, guided missile destroyers, the Gravely and the Mason. The Mason has been in the headlines a bunch lately related to the Houthi misadventures, Houthis shooting missiles at all kinds of things. The other day, the Houthis were responding to the fact that the Mason took custody of it turns out they were Somalis that tried to take that Israeli tanker hostage, and they took 5 of those guys into custody. And the original report was that the Houthis fired or attempted to fire on Mason as a result of them taking those pirates really into custody, but it turns out that those were just errant weapons, not aimed at Mason. Aboard Ike, as documented previously, is CAG-3, Carrier Air Wing 3. They have 4 Super Hornet squadrons. One of them is VFA 32. I'll just mention my channel. I'll always relate things to my career. So VF 32 was my first squadron, the Swordsman. Now they are a Super Hornet squadron aboard. And the strike group commander is a guy named Rear Admiral Mark, call sign Recon Miguez. Recon was a JO lieutenant in VF 102 aboard the USS George Washington when I was CAG Ops in the 97-98 timeframe. He got his call sign because he was a recon Marine in Desert Storm before he did a inter-service transfer, went to flight school and got his NFO wings, became a Tomcat Rio, and now he is the strike group commander for the Eisenhower Strike Group. So real proud of his progression. So our good friends at US9 News reported this yesterday. Eisenhower drone made unsafe pass close to Ike. A drone flew over the Eisenhower in an unsafe manner. Central Command reports the Eisenhower Strike Group is conducting routine flight ops. When it had the drone, hold on, this is going a little too fast. Let me go back. Okay, the conducting routine flight ops in the Central Arabian Gulf, and there's some confusion sometimes when they use the term Arabian Gulf. I think most of us call it the Persian Gulf. When it spotted a drone, later identified as Iranian. At one point, the drone got within 1,500 yards. That's very close of Eisenhower, according to Central Command release. The drone ignored multiple warnings. There's a quote: "The safe, unprofessional, and irresponsible behavior by Iran risks U.S. and partner nations' lives, needs to cease immediately," is what the release said, the CENTCOM release. U.S. naval forces remain vigilant and will continue to fly, sail, and operate anywhere international law allows while promoting regional maritime security. And then there's some boilerplate, as we've discussed. The strike groups in the Central Command AOR as part of the U.S. reaction to the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas, as well as strikes against U.S. coalition forces in Iraq and Syria, which the Pentagon attributes to Iranian-backed proxy groups. Strike group's presence is meant to act as a deterrent. So again, we've documented this in our most recent episode where we talked about the C-130J attack, the Ghost Rider attack. It goes on to say the drone's actions come as U.S. naval ships have shot down a number of missiles fired from Houthi-controlled areas in Yemen. Carney shot down a Houthi missile over the Red Sea, and that's the second time the Carney has done that. First one was that Quds missile that was allegedly on its way to Israel from Yemen. That's sort of the RMAX profile. And then another small boy, another Arleigh Burke class destroyer, the USS Thomas Hudner, which is actually assigned to the Ford Carrier Strike Group, is in the Red Sea. And that ship, as documented in our most recent episode, shot down drones on November 22nd and and 23rd. Oh, I'm sorry, November 22nd and November 15th. Okay, so plenty of action here. So we kind of need to think of two conflicts at once here. So Israel Hamas is going on in earnest. We're all waiting to see what happens with this ceasefire. As I said, as I reported in the last episode, Prime Minister Netanyahu has shown no indication that the ceasefire will lead to some sort of end of hostilities. The Israeli government remains committed to eradicating Hamas in Gaza. So we can imagine that once the ceasefire ends, when negotiations break down or they run out of hostages to offer to get them an extension. Remember, the calculus is basically a day for every, I think it's 10 hostages, and then they'll release. It seems like they're kind of doing 10x whatever Hamas releases. They'll release 10x Palestinian prisoners, of which there are some, teenagers and women as well. It's not all, fighters, Hamas fighters. So, and then the other war, let's say, conflict, is what's emerging, which I think it's safe to call it the US/NATO versus Iranian proxy groups war. And the Iranian proxy groups are, as we've stated, Houthis. There are the groups affiliated with the Iranian Republican Guard. There is Al-Qaeda, Arabian Peninsula. Remnants of ISIS are arcing around. There's Hezbollah, which are opening up a northern front that Israel's having to deal with, that are Iranian supplied, and of course Hamas. So we're not directly engaged with either Hamas or Hezbollah unless they're hanging out in Syria when we wind up counterattacking those groups based on them going after our outposts and bases and installations in Syria and Iraq. All right, so what we'll talk about today is a part of that proxy war. So originally, as we showed in the options there, it was thought that the USS Eisenhower and associated warships would relieve the USS Gerald Ford in the Med. And that changed not just because of the outbreak of hostilities on October 7th, but also because of the intel and the activities of the proxy groups and Iran as well. Remember, Iran has been attacking shipping, trying to seize shipping, and all kinds of other things where it's not just they're propping up the proxies, they're also, it seems like they're getting increasingly involved. And so that's why I do not pass or do not stop at, go or whatever the monopoly saying is, went through the Suez, Red Sea, boom, now in the Gulf. All right. So recently, today, in fact, some footage of these Iranian drones was posted online. So it's pretty interesting. So before we start to talk about the specifics of the Iranian order of battle, let me show this footage here. So here we see, that was Gravely before. Here's Eisenhower, an H-6C turning on the fantail, the stern of the ship. So I don't have a range readout. You have time, you have date, you have lat and long. That is an Arleigh Burke class destroyer. So again, I'm thinking that's probably Gravely, since Mason was in the Gulf of Aden at this time. So Gravely sailing in company with Eisenhower. So here's the flight deck of Eisenhower. Super Hornet, they're on Cat 2. Or I'm sorry, Cat 3 rather. That's Cat 3. A couple others parked, probably in an alert 5 status. And at this time, the Ike is in the Persian Gulf, and we'll talk about the sort of geo response time you have. This is the Philippine Sea. Normandy is the air warfare ship, what we call shotgun for forward strike group. Philippine Sea is for Eisenhower strike group. A very capable ship. You can see there's a helicopter there on the flight deck. And so this drone is just hanging. And they certainly knew it was there. Here's Eisenhower again. You can see the domes of the E-2s. The screw tops is the squadron. So we have Growlers, which is the electronic warfare version of the Super Hornet, and Super Hornets, both 1 and 2 seat. The FA-32 is the 2-seat squadron. Another view of the Gravely. Can't see the hull number, but I'm assuming that's the Gravely. So these guys are, this drone is pretty close, right? There's another helo on the fantail. So we naturally would ask, did the Eisenhower and the other warships in company know that that drone was there? And as I read in the US 9 News report, the answer is yes. But it seems like, if I'm reading between the lines, only later did they realize this was an Iranian drone, a reconnaissance drone. So let's talk about the Iranian order of battle here, starting with the drones that they have. So the first are what these are been popularly called suicide drones, the Shahed 136 drones. And these have been used in even Ukraine. You know, Russia has a bunch of these. They've been supplied by the Iranians. And so Russia's used these. These have been used by Hamas against Israel. You can see the dimensions there. It's a relatively small drone, 11.5 feet long, 6 feet wide, max speed of 115 miles per hour. So it's slow. And it has a 90-pound warhead, so it can do some damage. So that's the first sort of drone that we've seen. This is their version of Global Hawk, and it's a lot smaller. But you can see they sort of reverse engineered the shape of either Global Hawk or Reaper. Also, this is an armed drone. You can see the weapon station, the hard points there on the wing. So this is a concern to American forces. But the drone that took the footage was most likely this one, which was introduced to their inventory in 2013. So it's known as a Fatros drone. You see the name there on the side. This is their highest flying, longest loitering drone. It has both the twin tails and the V-tail. So this is what we believe was the drone that took the footage that we just showed. All right, so what is the end state here? What is Iran doing? Well, obviously it's not a huge leap in logic to say that their desire is to provoke, not necessarily attack, but provoke. Also, with each one of these sort of pulses, they're seeing if there are any soft spots, and how they would act on that is uncertain. And we'll talk about precedent for things going kinetic between the U.S. and Iran in a second here, but certainly they have the ability to reach out and touch American forces, particularly if they're located in the Gulf proper. So let's take a look at the Gulf. And if you remember, if you've read Punk's War, the first chapter starts with an Iranian F-4 overflying the boat. And the skipper relieves Punk, and he goons up the intercept. But the point is, there's not a whole lot of response time. So the geography of the Gulf with respect to aircraft carrier operations is there are basically 4 what we call CVOP areas, CVOA. 1 is the northmost, 4 would be the southernmost, or maybe it's the other way around. But in any case, the northern one is right there off of Bushehr, which is where their F-4s are. So you can see that doesn't allow an alert airplane a whole lot of response time. So this is guts ball. When you're in the Gulf, this is guts ball for the carrier and the air wing. Early in my career, when I did my first deployment aboard the USS Independence, aircraft carriers didn't go in the Gulf. Only small boys would occasionally. It took Desert Storm to open up the idea that we would put aircraft carriers in the Gulf. And then after that, all the cruises I did on Ike and America and George Washington doing Operation Southern Watch, we would go into the Gulf. In fact, as documented during my conversation with Admiral Mullen a few months ago, if you haven't seen that episode, check it out. But he was the strike group commander when I was CAG Ops, and we had 4 ships, 3 American carriers and a British Royal Navy carrier in the Gulf at the same time. That was too many, but we did it anyway. And that made a hard problem even harder in terms of deconfliction and airspace and all that sort of thing. So pay attention to Bushehr. They're just east of the E in Persian. The other air base to pay attention to and naval base that we'll talk about is Bandar Abbas, right there in the northern part of the Gulf, Strait of Hormuz. Another sporty area to transit. So what we used to do is we would launch a SUCAP, a surface warfare and strike cap package before the carrier got into the Straits of Hormuz, and then keep it airborne for the duration of that transit. And then once the carrier got in some steam room and some breathing room, which even at the widest part of the Gulf, there's not a whole lot, that strike package would recover. So pretty sporty because they have, Chinese Silkworm missiles and other missiles that could, if they wanted to attempt an attack on the strike group and the carrier, they could easily do that, particularly when the carrier is in the Strait of Hormuz. So here's a closer look at where the air bases of concern are. So we've got Bushehr, as I mentioned there. We've got Bandar Abbas, both the airfield and the naval base, where their home port is for a lot of their frigates and corvettes and their bog hammers. And then Chabahar is a patrol base. The thing that we used to deal with on my first deployment before we'd go into the Gulf, we're in the North Arabian Sea, was P-3s. They're American patrol planes that we gave the Iranians back in the Shah days. They would come out to take a look at the carrier, and we would launch the Tomcat and intercept them and escort them as they flew by the carrier, which they were allowed to do. They didn't overfly the carrier, but they flew near the carrier, and we would ensure there was always a Tomcat between them and the carrier. So any pictures they took had a Tomcat in them as a way to remind them that probably a bad idea to try anything that they would regret. So we've talked about the drone order of battle. Let's talk about the Iranian Air Force. Now, let me read a global security summary of their Air Force. It's pretty good. It says, today, the Islamic Republic of Iran Air Force is representative of a handful of countries worldwide that have a moderately sized force utilizing some elements of technology that enhance their lethality and or survivability. It is a hodgepodge. That's a good way to put it, because I think hodgepodge applies to all their branches of military, certainly applies to their Air Force, of aircraft and capabilities resulting from multiple conflicts and previous military acquisitions. So documented in the deep dive I did on the smugglers of Tomcat parts. If you haven't seen that episode, I recommend you check it out. If you have any interest in how the Iranian Air Force got where it is with respect to its capabilities, because it started with the Islamic Revolution, where the Ayatollah took over. They took Americans hostage, held them at the embassy for 444 days. That was the Carter administration. President Reagan came into office, and they were released on the day of his inauguration. I remember that very well. I was a midshipman at the Naval Academy, and that was a day of jubilation, just as the Desert Storm debacle, the Desert One, rather, debacle, where we tried to rescue those hostages in a way that we were not prepared because we didn't quite have jointness suitcase, and that was a forcing function, that disaster, the Desert One disaster. But hostages came out after 444 days. But meanwhile, the Ayatollah and the religious clerics did not trust the military. They didn't trust anybody who was educated or who was westernized. So all of the particularly Tomcat pilots were trained in the United States, both pilots and Rios. And some of my instructors, when I went through Rio training, had Iranian Rios as classmates, and they had some interesting stories about those folks. And so this mistrust between the Ayatollah, the clerics, and the Air Force led to a increased degradation of their warfighting capability. And they were engaged in the long and bloody Iran-Iraq war for years and years. Again, I've covered that in that Iranian Tomcat episode. So it goes on to say that the composition of this Air Force, including previously exported U.S. fighters, is somewhat unique in regards to the potential threat facing the U.S., which is what we're talking about today. Another significant portion of their fleet is remnant of the Gulf War in '91, with multiple Iraqi aircraft acquired as defectors during the conflict. So the other thing we've talked about on the channel is, in the face of the overwhelming air superiority of the first few days of Desert Storm in 1991, a lot of the Iraqi Air Force pilots, instead of heading south into the fight, headed east into Iran and tried to get asylum. I understand anecdotally they weren't treated very well when they got there, but all of the MiG-29s that they took over there, some MiG-25s, Mirage F-1s, were co-opted into the Iranian Air Force. None of these aircraft included any maintenance or replacement parts, and they are questionable in their operation. So a lot of the numbers that we'll go over here are kind of a guesstimate based on that reality. Iran is in constant contact with the Russian military industry and is suspected of attempting to acquire modern fighters. This is why we chop up Tomcats, for instance, that are parked at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in the Boneyard, the aircraft preservation facility. The officials at Davis-Monthan hate it when you call that place the Boneyard. I found that out the hard way when I was given a tour of that amazing facility. So that's why we chop up Tomcats, is so black market profiteers cannot get even like standby gyros or Calfax fittings or anything from the Tomcat to the Iranians who need them to keep their Tomcats particularly airborne. In addition to Russia and Belarus, Iran trades military technology with China, North Korea, and even Brazil. That's a surprise, potentially bolstering their older Air Force with newer equipment. And we'll go over details of what they've done specifically by type model series as we go along here. Not much is known openly about these capabilities, and it's difficult to believe what is released. However, it was clear as of mid-2014 that Iran had not received any new fighter aircraft and had not produced any internal to Iran. Now, they have modified, particularly their Tomcat fleet, and also they made their version of the AIM-54 Phoenix. So they're innovating in a way that is laudable and merits focus. It goes on to say, and again, this is from globalsecurity.org, while Iranian territory is large, it is usually concluded that most of their fighters are deployed around their strategic centers of gravity, specific around Tehran and Esfahan. So they're probably not on the, let's call it the littorals, right, on the shoreline. That's why when I pointed out Bushehr, that's where their F-4s are. That's not where their F-14s are. So keep that in mind. But they're operating drones out of the littorals with impunity. And we'll talk about why that is so as well. It says here, a potential aerial battle might take place on the outer perimeters of the central region, consisting of the number of the Iranian forces that are operational. Okay, so let's go through the box score here, starting with the MiG-29. So, and this is from multiple sources that I'm getting these numbers. 40 plus. So I've seen anywhere from 40 to 44 MiG-29s are in the Iranian Air Force. Of that number, it's unknown how many are actually in service. They have been modded to carry the Nasser-1 anti-ship missile. So that is whatever number they have that are operational, that is a air-to-surface threat to the American fleet. Okay, we talked about the Tomcat, the F-14. These are F-14As and highly modified. Again, I entreat you to watch the episode about how smugglers have assisted in keeping these airplanes airborne. They have done a lot of homegrown engineering, again, to my eye, laudable, to keep these airplanes flying. So it's believed of the 40 they have in their inventory that half of them, 20, are fully mission capable, and the other half are either at parade rest, being hangar queens that are being cannibalized to keep the other 20 airborne, or in some partially mission capable situation. Now, this is primarily an air-to-air platform, although they have made some air-to-surface weapons, so it could be used as a ship attack platform. However, this is the crown jewel of the Iranian Air Force, and you have to believe that they wouldn't throw these at the U.S. Navy assets that are aboard the aircraft carriers. They also have 10 of these Su-22s. Now, they've been upgraded. That one looks like it's hand-painted, right? It's landing, I don't know if that's Tehran or what city that is. But they've been upgraded significantly. They can carry smart bombs. The other thing they can do that's relevant to our sort of most likely threat, the most likely way that the Iranians would come after American forces, is this airplane can do the loyal wingman thing with their UAVs, which is an impressive capability. They have, and this is the highest number of airplanes in their Air Force, 64 F-4Ds and Es with new Chinese radars and weapons. So this isn't your granddad's Phantom. If you saw the Heater episode, this is an airplane that in a 1v1 with a Super Hornet would lose unless the Super Hornet pilot lost sight, because as Heater says, this is not a great turning airplane. So you can imagine in the phone booth that would be a 1v1 in the Gulf, this airplane would be at a disadvantage. However, you can't shoot down what you can't see. And so if this Phantom gets a jump on the aircraft carrier coming out of Bushehr, a la Chapter 1 of Punk's War, then it's a concern. It does have air-to-surface weapons as well, both smart and dumb weapons. They have modified their F-5s to be a ground attack airplane. This is another bit of homegrown engineering that they have created. And these Su-24s, originally Russian-built Su-24s, they have developed their own version of the HARM missile, anti-radiation missile, that they use this in the suppression of enemy air defense role, SEAD. We've talked about with Justin Bronk and other folks, the SEAD role. So all these added together can equal some pretty good capability if they were smart about how they executed any kind of defense in depth or offense in depth, sort of a strike. Another, oh, by the way, since we were just talking about C-130s on the previous episode, they have straight stick C-130s. I think this is the H version of the C-130. So that is the air order of battle. Let's talk about their sea order of battle. And this primarily originates out of Bandar Abbas. So they have the pride and joy are these SAM-class frigates. They have corvettes, not the car, but the ship, corvettes. These are patrol craft that have the surface-to-surface missiles. It's their version of the Harpoon. They also have guns on the bow, and they have Kilo-class submarines and some other classes of submarine. This is the primary concern for the American Navy. These submarines have Russian torpedoes. The way we monitor their activity is, are they in port? And as long as their 3 or 4 submarines are in port, that means they're not at sea. So we'll talk about our ASW capability as we go forward here. So you remember the precedent for this is an episode that we did a few months ago about praying mantis. Remember, I did it with my good friend Brad Peniston, who wrote a book about the Samuel B. Roberts and how that ship did amazing damage control after it hit a mine in the Persian Gulf. That ship hitting that mine created the American operation called Praying Mantis, which was headed by an admiral that I worked for later, Admiral Tony Less. He was a 2-star. This is before we had a 5th Fleet. It was called Nav Cent at that time, when Admiral Less was there at Bahrain. Again, let me bring up the Persian Gulf map. So our bases, the 5th Fleet headquarters is in Manama, Bahrain. So it's a very small country. If you see where Qatar is, just slightly above that is Bahrain. I remember is there's a causeway from Saudi to Bahrain, and the Saudi princes don't drink in Saudi Arabia, but they drive over the causeway and they drink with a gusto when they get to Manama. Pulled a lot of liberty in Manama. Also, Manama was where we would stop off to head to Saudi if we had to do strike planning at the joint Southwest Asia, JTF Southwest Asia. So Manama is the center of 5th Fleet gravity. The other places to note, Doha and Qatar is where a lot of the tankers are based, at Sheikh Issa and other places around Qatar, however you want to pronounce it. Done some stuff at Kuwait City. Al Jaber operated out of there during Operation Southern Watch. So we have facilities in Kuwait and have had since the Desert Storm. We have also pull into port in Dubai a bunch. You can see here's Ingrid. Ingrid, the wonder dog, has shown up. So that's kind of where we are in the theater. And during Praying Mantis, it was an 8-hour war that basically put half the Iranian Navy on the bottom during that time. So it was started because of the Samuel B. Roberts circumstance on the 14th. And then 2 days later, the mission was basically take out one of their frigates. And it escalated from there. And basically, Admiral Les had to kind of say a ceasefire because this is kind of getting out of hand. He and the Pentagon weren't comfortable with the degree to which the air wing aboard Enterprise. You can see Enterprise is not in the Gulf. Enterprise is in the Gulf of Oman in the North Arabian Sea. But the airplanes, A6s and A7s, were used extensively. Tomcat didn't see any action really. And this is kind of how it turned out for the Iranians. That's one of their frigates. So that's kind of the scene setter. Let me bring up the comments now, and let's open up a little bit of a dialogue here. So bear with me here. I'll try to find a good one. So Miles B says everything they have is old and outdated. Okay, yes, but as I've described, if they use it smartly, it is a threat. The other thing that has come up in discussions, and this was happening on a Twitter thread today. Let me grab a sip of tasty beverage here. Hold on. This was coming up during discussion today associated with that footage is, okay, drone swarms, right? What if the Iranians launch everything they got at any one of our surface combatants or at Ike? What could the air wing do? What can the ship do to protect itself? So forth and so on. So both Eisenhower and the small boys have close-in weapon systems. You can see the CIWS mounts here, the little bubble there, various places on the ship. This one, in fact, if you look towards the stern there, that's the CIWS, the close-in weapon system. So this is an auto gun that basically lines up a stream of bullets with the target and just decimates the target. It's indiscriminate once it's commanded to fire. So if there was a drone swarm, CIWS would be very effective. But there is a finite amount of ordnance in each one of these CIWSs, kind of thing. It's unrealistic to think that the air wing would respond in any sort of meaningful way to a swarm of drones. Now, a single drone, if we have tipper information that they're launching drones, a Super Hornet could find and shoot down any one of the drones that we discussed previously, for sure. Now, how would it do that? Well, it probably wouldn't use AMRAAM or a Sidewinder. The heat signature on any one of those drones is very minuscule. It would probably gun the drones. Remember, as I said before, these things are going 170 knots, maybe slower than that even. So that's going to be a guns kill, probably, kind of a thing. But the other thing that we have to think about, and this is kind of a hashtag FAFO circumstance, And this is why I'm talking about praying mantis. The lessons of praying mantis are not lost on the Iranians, although that happened, 1988. They remember that. Certainly the military veterans who are still around remember that. And I'm sure they've taught those who are currently in the Navy these days. I'm sure their training academies use this as a case study. So I doubt they're in a big hurry to repeat that. So this is where the deterrence thing, presence equals deterrence, is why we're there. And you can think about it. Let me bring up this footage again. So you're like, okay, A, do we know it was there? And why didn't we shoot it down? Fair question. So as we've already said, yes, we knew it was there. We didn't know it was Iranian until after the fact. Didn't shoot it down because it didn't seem like it was hostile in nature, 1,500 yards away. Again, if this is a armed drone, they're within a firing solution at any one of these warships, but chose not to. Right? We chose not to shoot it down. Okay. So had this drone attacked any of our ships, is an act of war, obviously. Right? So at that point, it's either a limited proportional reaction, or it's full up, break out the contingency strike folders and get ready to do a war against Iran. So without giving anything away, because again, I don't have any classified data clearance. I don't have top secret clearance anymore. And I don't know specifically anything about what they're doing aboard CAG-3 or aboard Ike. So I'm just saying in general, what aviators do during the downtime, which there is none, is you plan strikes. You have strike leads, you have all the elements of your strike. Go into Civic, you brief the admiral, you hone it into a fine oiled machine that's going to be able to execute if the bubble goes up. So CAG-3 and the associated ships, because the air wing is not going to fight in a vacuum, right? So you've got a Tomahawk cruise missile salvo that would take out the integrated air defense, the IADS rollback. You have weaponeering for each one of the weapons you would use. Also, that IADS rollback includes the USS Florida, which is an SSGN that is in company with Ike, right? Remember, there's at least one sub there, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's a couple other SSNs lurking around. This is the silent service. They don't like to be, they don't like the spotlight. So those are also TLAM shooters. They're capable of shooting cruise missiles. But let's just back up, right? I doubt that Iran is very interested in starting a hot war with the United States. So let me look again. I'm trying to get a conversation going here. So Richie says, for those wondering why the CSG took no action against the drone, it was outside of threat range. Look at the zoom levels. Also, the drone, as well as Iran, is inconsequential. So maybe the first part is true. Iran is not inconsequential. This is what we've documented over the past number of weeks since October 7th and before. Iran is supplying the bad actors in the region. Iran is the country that ever since we toppled Saddam, that we're dealing with here. It's a nuclear threat. This is why we're trying to keep them from having nuclear weapons capability. It's a proxy threat. It's a supply threat. It's an axis of evil, to quote Bush 43 threat. They're in cahoots with Russia and North Korea and China in a way that's counter-Western, anti-American. So they are consequential. But I agree with your first part there. It was out of range. CH asks, is that Strait of Hormuz a dangerous choke point? Yes, as discussed previously, a very dangerous choke point. Alan says, nice wire-haired retriever. That's a German wire-haired pointer. Cool dog. So it says non-political statement, but T. Roosevelt was mostly correct in his statement, walk softly but carry a big stick. With Iran and others, the walking softly needs reevaluation. Roger. So again, presence is supposed to be its own deterrent. And look at American history. Ever since what? Let's go back to, you can talk about Jefferson, you can talk about Monroe, Stephen Decatur, John Barry, the original 6 ships. So basically, and I love looking at the life of Stephen Decatur. The guy was a rock star. And so the Monroe administration basically said, hey, you guys, can you kind of stay where I can see you? Please don't go over the horizon. And they're kind of like, what? And they went. So they get to the Med, and the Europeans are like, well, we got to pay the Barbary pirates tribute, right? This is that we pay them so they don't attack us. And the Americans are like, what? We're not paying anybody any money. You know, we're America. We're here to ensure freedom of navigation, and we're not paying anybody. And so the Europeans are like, you know, this is the Dutch, the French, the Spanish, the Royal Navy, the Brits are like, okay, have fun with that. And so we go to war with the Barbary states. And there was a very heroic rescue of prisoners that was accomplished by Stephen Decatur. And he wound up burning the ship to the waterline, his ship to the waterline in the process. But this is the shores of Tripoli. This is all that stuff, right? So your U.S. Navy, like any NATO Navy, is a expeditionary force. They don't go where things are necessarily nice. They go where things are potentially hostile. Sometimes it goes poorly as a result. Think of Stark, right? And some other situations that have happened in this AOR. I don't want to say that's the cost of doing business, but this is why the U.S. Navy focuses on damage control so well and so intensely, because we expect to get fired upon, to get cheap shotted, to get rabbit punched in ways that these asymmetric powers are likely to do. So this is what the Navy looks to do. So we're not going to not go in harm's way. Again, Ike is looking for not trouble, but is ready in the event that it happens, right? If you didn't want to prove a point, you wouldn't sail into the Persian Gulf. You wouldn't go in the 5th Fleet AOR. So why are we there? Keep the war from spreading the Israel-Hamas war and deter Iran from supplying bad actors, particularly in this region, with impunity. Okay, so the ball is kind of in Iran's court with respect to what are they looking to do now that we're there. And remember, our presence there has been interrupted from time to time in recent years. We used to have 24/7, 365 Desert Storm on presence, sometimes 2.0 presence in the Gulf. And we did gap it because we sometimes ran out of aircraft carriers. Sometimes we'd put an amphib in there instead. Sometimes we'd gap it, which the 5th Fleet commander is never happy with, just like the 6th Fleet commander isn't happy to not have a carrier in his region these days. Obviously, things going on in Ukraine, that's what the Adriatic is all about. And now with the Israel-Hamas thing going on, there needs to be presence in East Med. Although Ford is not right there in the littorals anymore. They've kind of faded back. They're south of Crete, as you could see in the US 9 News fleet tracker. All right, let's look at some other. We already talked about this one. Again, I apologize for me just scrolling here. Here's my good friend Doug Sherman, patron number 1. How long do you think Ford will be extended? Well, that's the question that the folks on Ford are asking right now. Right? So of my 4 full-length deployments, 2 of them were extended. First one was John F. Kennedy, 1987. So another Middle East circumstance. Religious cleric Terry Waite was taken hostage in Lebanon. We were about to leave the Med. We were in Benidorm, Spain, having pretty cool liberty. And then the dreaded helicopter with the dipping sonar, which is a signal, get back to the ship immediately, flew by the hotel we were staying in. So we all hauled ass back to the ship, buttoned it up. Some guys missed ship's movement and sortied as fast as a conventional aircraft carrier CV-67 could go. Parked off of the coast of Israel and Lebanon. Rumors were rampant. How long are we going to get extended? Is it going to be a face-to-face turnover with our relief that was the USS Saratoga, which had just started their final workup period? So Sarah was still 3 months from deploying, and we weren't intending to do a face-to-face turnover. Like, if we've got to do a face-to-face turnover because now they want 2 carrier presence in the East Med, then we're going to get extended for a long time here. Okay. So the question, Doug, is what is the presence requirement as we go forward here? So can Bataan go from the Red Sea into the East Med and act as presence? Because otherwise, the next ship up, I believe, is Theodore Roosevelt. And they've got a few months to go before they're underway. So, this can be a morale challenge. If you had a countdown calendar, you're like, okay, because they were already supposed to be home. You guys remember, if you saw the episode that we did with Admiral Verissimo down at the air show at Oceana a few months ago, that was mid-September, I was asking him, how's Ford doing? And he said, oh, it's going great. How about emails catch? Plenty good. How about electric weapons elevators working good? Lessons learned going to be put onto the next Kennedy CVN-79. Everything's good. In fact, this cruise is only 5 months. They're going to come back, do a yard availability. We'll add some other, modifications and upgrades and put her right back on deployment. So obviously that plan is moot. So they've already been on cruise as we're sitting here. I want to say it's about 210 days. And so let's just say no end in sight. The Navy won't tell you what the answer is. And so, I don't know the answer, but they're certainly doing an important job there. Like I said in my Thanksgiving short outreach to them, presence does matter in this case. So presence in the Med, presence in the Gulf, whether it's the North Arabian Sea or Persian Gulf proper, matters a lot, as we're already seeing. So I don't know, and I hate to hazard a guess. So it's just a matter of what is the demand signal from Sixth Fleet in the case of Ford for presence, and what is Secretary Austin, what's his temperature on all of this. Now, the only thing I will say about this that big Navy has to think about, that if the Navy does this wrong in terms of extending, if, for instance, as documented on the previous episode, CVN-77's last cruise was 257 days long. And you remember Harry S. Truman's cruise before that was not as long, but pretty long. So if 9-10 month deployments are becoming the standard, then we're going to relearn the lesson that we learned during the Lehman era, which is if you don't strike a op-tempo, pers-tempo balance, then you're going to lose people. Everybody's willing to do their fair share, but if people are rode hard and not put away at all, not to mention put away wet, they're probably going to talk with their feet, as we say, in terms of retention. So this generally affects your mid-grade enlisted and officer corps. So these are the people that should be fleeting up into leadership roles. And if they're like, the wife's unhappy, kids are little league age, I'm going to go, I'll do anything else, I've heard say at the back of ready rooms from time to time. So if that's the case, then that can affect our readiness going forward. So we'll see how the Navy works that calculus, sort of sliding scale. The answer is, and this is Mooch's opinion, 11 carriers, shared by a lot of navalists, by the way. 11 carriers is not enough. You can see we have 11, 8 are underway, 4 are downrange. All right, let's bring up the fleet tracker again. Okay, so we've discussed there's Ford in the Med, there's Ike in the Gulf. Meanwhile, Reagan and Vinson are in the Western Pacific. Okay, so we haven't talked about China threat. We need to get our good friend Blake Herzinger from Singapore back on the channel for a live stream. It's been a while since we talked to Blake, but they're doing important work keeping the Pentagon's pacing threat, that hasn't changed, China, where they need to be, right? So, okay, here are 4. You can see TR is CONUS. The other carriers are either, in doing RCOH or other availabilities as described in that episode a few weeks ago about the global carrier situation, right? So this is what you get when you have 11 carriers. One of them is extended with no end in sight, right? And this, if you see pictures of rusty ships, it's because they were extended beyond what the planning had allowed for, and so there's a lot of sea watchers and people who sit important take ships of rusty Navy ships, combatants coming back in, and everybody's like, what's going on? Why is our Navy in such disrepair? That's cosmetics, but that's a function of not having these yard periods, and so this is why we need a robust fleet, not to mention more aircraft carriers. All right, let's go back to the comments. Jesse says, never underestimate your enemy. That is Sun Tzu, I think, right? So that's sage advice. A.D. Tinman says, you ever heard of predators or reapers? Yes, we have them, right? And just documented that a reaper was shot down by the Houthis in the Red Sea a couple of weeks ago. Yes, we have drone capability. Drones would certainly be in any contingency operation that we would do against Bandar Abbas, et cetera, right? The drones would be the first wave, and we have pretty impressive drone capability along with our cruise missile capability. Salem High School volleyball, is this the whole team is up? That's great. Thanks. Good to see you guys. So they use everything they got and we lose one ship. Fair trade. Not really. That's not a fair trade. And we're not, if they strike a ship, that isn't necessarily a ship lost. That's the other thing. When we talk about Chinese hypersonics and critics are like, aircraft carriers are sitting ducks, et cetera, that does not account for survivability of a carrier. And I invite you to watch the video footage of the USS America. Breaks my heart. I did the last cruise of America in 95, 96. America being sunk off the coast of Virginia. Took a long time for that ship to go down. So damage control, these ships are designed to take some hits. So getting attacked by a drone does not equal a ship getting sunk. Keep that in mind as well. Now, it's not something we want to do wantonly or, whatever, but the calculus is well taken, and that may be the way it would play out, right? So Antonio says, first pulp fiction reference I heard today. Did I do a pulp fiction reference? Antonio, I don't remember that. Good question from James Horan. What are the rules of engagement? I don't know, right? The rules of engagement are classified, but what I imagine they are is it's not quite wait until you're shot at, but you can react in a timely fashion to provocative behavior. So if you give a ship a warning, the ship doesn't abide, another warning, and now either a collision is imminent or it looks like they're, radars are coming on, or all that sort of stepping up through the ROE matrix, then I'm sure that we're prepared in the event that the Iranians do something hostile. The way ROE is written, among other things, is how would it look, how would it read if we take a hit? Did we hang our forces out unduly? So there's got to strike a balance, because this is deterrence, this is presence. We're not trying to start a war, we're trying to prevent a war. So our mere presence is supposed to be whatever. And as I said, we go into harm's way willfully. The Gulf itself. I mean, it's like, this is varsity time when you put into the Gulf. And so the ROE, I'm sure, is aggressive to a point. But to be honest, I don't know infinitum what it is, but that's a good question. If I find anything out, I definitely would do an episode about that. Super Bob says, yep, it only takes one crazy to get things out of hand real quick. Yeah, and that crazy may be the Ayatollah route. Jesse Mackey says, Mount Whitney is an amphibious command and control ship. It's been used for years as the 6th Fleet flagship. Okay, cool. Thanks for keeping me honest there. 7th Fleet flagship is another LCC, the Blue Ridge. Awesome intel. Thank you, Jesse. Okay, Bastion71 said, why did they pull back instead of sinking everything the Iranians had afloat? What could they do about it? Protest strongly? They didn't want to start a full-up war against Iran, is basically it. They were trying to keep it proportional to what happened to the Samuel B. Roberts, and it was threatening to get out of hand. So it's just a judgment call that Admiral Less and Secretary of Defense made, and CNO and others made at the time. So this is always the question is, keep the tanks rolling. If we'd done it right the first time, we wouldn't be back in there. So, but in that case, they were already concerned that it had gotten a little bit out of hand at the time, but fair question. All right, let's do one more. We've been live here for a while. I thank you guys for this nice crowd we've had. Last one. Okay, Smedley Do-Right, probably not his real name. I think the USN has at least tested laser weapons on ships. Yes, so that's the next thing, is directed energy weapons. This is our defense against things like hypersonics. As mentioned, there was some conversations about putting a laser weapon on the Ghost Rider, the AC-130J. Technology isn't quite where it needs to be to make this a reality. Power supplies, targeting, support, maintenance, all of these things are still not where we need them, but that's the next generation. It's going to be directed energy weapons. And that's the conversation when we talk about the Ford-class carriers, is those reactors have so much excess power that you could power directed energy weapons, no problem. It's just a matter of real estate and the technology of those directed energy weapons, which is in work. And so that will change the Chinese hypersonics conversation a lot. All right. So I think we'll call it at that one. We've been an hour and 15 minutes. Thanks, you guys. Look for other current events episodes in the days that follow and other stuff coming up. As always, thank you for your support. If you're not a subscriber, and we are approaching 500,000 subscribers, that's such a cool number. I never imagined I would be at that number. That's a milestone. So if you're not a subscriber, become one, and you'll get alerts and you'll know, hey, live streams are happening and that sort of thing. Thanks for joining me for this live stream. As I said, it's been a while since I've done one. This is a different format, obviously, than my pre-produced stuff. I like to chat with you guys. Thanks for bringing your savvy and your enthusiasm. And as I always say, in the meantime, I look forward to talking to you again very soon.